Trump is in big trouble, and he does not understand this. And I'm being very vocal about it because I want to try to save the guy. God says, I'm going to bring on another assassination. I'm going to remind you, hey, I'm the guy in charge, not just Secret Service. I could have had this guy come and kill both you and your wife. It was a divine decree that he be saved. This assassination occurred again as a reminder to Trump, do what I sent you for. You need to take out one of the most evil regimes ever known. Negotiating? What are you talking about? You don't negotiate with a Hitlerian evil. A nation that kills 45,000 of its citizens? Trump is the greatest danger the Sultan has ever seen, because if he succeeds in getting rid of Iran, who begins to die? Sutton. But Trump is committing a terrible mistake. He's not listening to the divine message.
Okay, everyone, I am so grateful to be joined from America by Rabbi Mendel Kessin. Rabbi Kessin, we had you on JTV for the first time for your debut interview a couple months ago, and we got such positive feedback that I've been inundated with people saying you have to get Rabbi Kessin back on JTV. So thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So your last video is really what I want to follow up on, where you shared this idea that you believe, and you've been studying the sources. You're probably one of the most prominent rabbis that I can find online that is well-versed in all the Torah sources about the pre-Messianic era and the Messianic era and how that transition is going to look and what to expect. And really appreciate you for your content that you do there. But you said specifically that there's this tradition that Esau, Jacob's brother, Esau in Hebrew, who tormented Jacob, but really was meant to have this role of being part of Israel's mission by being a man of the field and going out there into the world and fighting all the negative impulses. He was really meant to partner with Israel in bringing God into this world, but he succumbed to the Satan, to the negative side. But you explain that there's an idea that Esau will come back at the end of days before the Messianic era to rectify his job and to complete his mission and to partner with Israel in fighting all the darkness. And you said that you believe that Trump is actually a reincarnation of Esau and Esau. And what I wanted to talk to you today about was how you think Trump is doing so far based on what you believe to be his mission. I have to say, before we dive into that, the more I've thought about this archetype that you've presented of Trump being having a job of Esau, the more I really resonate with it, because as I'm commenting on him day to day, I do feel like this is someone who really is this kind of anti-hero that some people describe, this imperfect servant who is, yes, he's very earthy, he's very clumsy and unrefined with his language, and he goes, he gets what he wants, and he's impulsive, and he's very earthy, like Esau was meant to be, but he's using all of that to fight the necessary battles and in the service of doing what's right and what's good, particularly with regard to all these geopolitical issues, and standing alongside Israel and fighting Iran, all these things. So I just want to say I really resonate with that characterization. And so really the discussion we agreed we'd get into today is, how is Trump doing in his mission? Because certainly when it comes to Iran, a lot of progress has been made since we last spoke, but it hasn't been a total victory, has it? So, Rabbi, why don't you give us your thoughts on where we're at?
Well, what I'd like to present, which obviously needs some type of introduction, what exactly is the mission? And I use that word very strongly, the mission of Trump from a divine perspective. Now, what I'm going to say is you're not going to find in the New York Times or whatever else they got in England. I'm not familiar with the newscasters in England and so on. But I'm going to try to give you a whole different, otherworldly, and I don't mean physical worlds, I mean, a heavenly perspective of a divine agenda. Because in the end, we don't realize it, but every single thing that transpires here in everybody's life, and I mean everybody, is directed and organized by heaven. We, however, can choose. We have free will to choose in any given situation what we will do with that situation. And that's the purpose of creation, to choose correctly, right? And as a result of that, to be rewarded with eternal life. This is basically the gist of what Judaism is. But don't make a mistake. We are in many ways directed by heaven because each of us has a mission. And this is certainly true of Donald Trump. Now, but his mission obviously is different because he is president and so on. So I want to present exactly what his mission is and how is he doing.
By the way, guys, just wanted to say, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, like our video, comment, hype our videos. All these things really help us to grow, to get into the algorithm, and to continue to delivering videos, which I hope you will really appreciate.
Okay, so the first thing I want to present is something which I don't know if anybody really thinks about, but it's actually proof that Donald Trump is an incarnation of a divine figure or a biblical figure, which I doubt if he even thinks about or understands. What is that proof? You know, when Rivka, which was the mother of Esau, or the wife of so on, of Yitzchak, when she was carrying children, she was expecting, they were fighting, and the Bible fully describes this, and Pashas told us. They were fighting with each other in her womb, in her uterus, which of course is beyond belief. What does that mean, embryos fighting? And they're twins. Okay, physical, real twins. And they really were identical, even though Esau had certain characteristics which seemed to be different than Yaakov. But in any case, what is interesting is she didn't know what was going on. So she went to the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, that's what it was called. And it was a yeshiva not only of teaching education, but also of prophecy, obviously. So she went there to find out what in the world is going on within her. And they told us something fascinating. They said, "You carrying twins." And they're battling it out because they are of two different natures, which when you think about it, you know, these are twins, two different natures, and so on. But I want to describe the last thing they said. I want to go into the whole prophecy. But what they said is Rav Yavod Tzoyer. The older will serve the younger. That's what they said. Now, most people, you know, okay, now what? Remember, this is a prophecy, which means it must come true, you know, and that's very important to know. But wait a minute. It says that Esau became a rasha, an evil person, when he was 13 years old. He's quite precocious and so on. 13 years old, he's an evil person, you see. And at 15, he went public. This is what the Chazal tell us, and so on. So wait a minute. When did he serve? And the older will serve the younger. That means Esau will serve Jacob, you see. So the question, of course, is, excuse me, when? If he became a rasha at 13, we don't find him serving Jacob, right? At 13 years old. And he was evil by then. So of course he's not going to serve Jacob. And then he became 15. Forget about it. He was completely publicly evil. So when is this prophecy fulfilled? I don't know if people think about that. Comes out that prophecy that Jacob, that Esau, his brother, will serve Jacob never happened. That doesn't make sense. It cannot be, because they were issuing a prophetic statement, and that must happen. That is proof that, wait a minute, if it must happen, right? So when did it happen? And now we see that means it must have happened at a certain time period, not then because it became evil. It happened at the end of time, right? Which means that Esau is going to come back as a believing person, not a Russia. You know, he may be very earthly, so to speak, but he won't be evil. He will come back at the end of time to assist Jacob. There you are. That prophecy is referring to the future. Eventually, this is what's going to happen. Most people don't think it that way, and
Do
so
the
on.
Torah sources tell us that this is what it means, that it's really a messianic prophecy?
Well, the commentaries, the one who says this, you know, but actually, there's something even more stunning, which you must know. The great Makubal Kabbalist, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, says in his Sefer that they were twins. But why would they be twins? Because he says, and this is very important, that really Yaakov and Esau were both patriarchs. Now, everybody thinks there are only three patriarchs, but it's not true. Because if you remember, Jacob married two women. And the second woman that he married, actually, he married her first, but she was the second wife, was Leah. He married Rachel and Leah, and so on. But wait a minute. Why, if you have three patriarchs, do you have four matriarchs? That's odd. And the answer is because there are really four patriarchs. Esau is a patriarch. You have any idea what that means? That means he had the neshama of a patriarch. He was as great as Avram, Yitzchok, and Yaakov. In fact, there is a commentary on the Torah. He's considered a Rishon, the Paneach Rosa, says the following, that Esau was so great in his potential, because he obviously never lived up to it, and so on, that he would have been twice as great as Yaakov Avinu in heavenly stature. I don't know if we can even imagine what that means, because the gematria, the numerical value of Esau, is 2 times Yaakov with a vav. In fact, the Medrash says that what really was supposed to happen, had Esau fulfilled his position, is that Yaakov would have 6 tribes, and the other 6 would belong to Esau. Could you imagine? Esau should have had 6 tribes, and Yaakov should only had 6, not 12. It begins to show you what this man was. Now, I could talk further on that as proof and so on, but I'm going to skip that because I have a lot to get to. In any case, so we're looking here at an incredible person of stature who was great, or twice as great as what Yaakov could have achieved. That would have been Esau. So he was supposed to marry Leah. So when he became an evil person at 13, went public at 15, right? Somebody had to take over the job. And that job went to Yaakov. So Yaakov piggybacked. He had 2 jobs. One of his
By the way, I
own.
just thought for a second it might be worth, some of our audience aren't familiar with Hebrew, so if ever we use a Hebrew phrase, we should just explain. So Yaakov is Jacob and Esau is
Oh,
Esau, as we've explained.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, right. So what happened was really incredible. Yaakov took over the job. Jacob took over the job of Esau. 2 jobs for one of, right? And he gave it up. Why? Because one man really cannot take 2 jobs, not permanently, because he doesn't have the character, without getting into that. So the one who had to take it over, who took over Esau's job, because Esau had a job that would create a rectification of the creation. Who took it over? Yosef. That's why Yosef
Joseph.
is so great. And anyway, I don't get,
Joseph,
so it's a long story, but anyway, but so Esau became a Russia. That's the important thing.
which is means an evil man.
An evil man, right? I'm sorry, like,
No, no worries, no worries.
okay. Now, but things changed because Esau repented at the end of days. Why? Because when he met Jacob, right? He met him after Jacob came back from the house of Laban, as it says in the Torah. So Esau said to Jacob, and he was going to come to kill him, by the way. I don't get into the whole story, but he was coming to kill Jacob. And all of a sudden, he kissed him when he met him. And he said to him, Yehi lecha sheloch, let that which is yours remain yours. And Rashi, the great commentary, says, Chazal say that this meant that Esau said, okay, I give up. I admit that the inheritance or the blessings that Isaac gave you, let it remain in your possession. That meant that Esau did tshuva, because here he's coming to kill him.
His repentance.
He's repenting. But the problem was, without getting into the whole story, is that Jacob did not recognize that this was the tshuva of Esau. He didn't recognize that. And he should have given him Dinah, his daughter to Esau to marry, which was permitted in those days, and so on. And Dinah was a strong person. She would have taken Esau and got him to be an observant Jew, whatever, and so on. But he
Right.
did, and he was therefore punished with, and so on, whatever. But so this meant that Esau could have done tshuva, real tshuva, but he didn't. So God at that time said something incredible. He said, it's true, you could have done tshuva, but Jacob, didn't realize it. So what I'm going to do for you in reward is you are going to come back at the end of time, right? And do tshuva and assist Jacob to bring the Messiah. And that's exactly what happened. How? It happened because Trump is a reincarnation of Esau. Really, he's a reincarnation of Marcus Aurelius, okay, and Antoninus, and so on. That's really what he is. But Marcus Aurelius, is a Gilgal, what's called the reincarnation of Esau. So we're looking at a man, Esau, coming back to assist Jacob. Now, for whatever reason, without getting into that, when Trump came down that escalator in 2015, I also thought this whole thing was a joke, but I realized that no, it's not. Trump, right, is going to win. Why? Because God is bringing back, I recognize that Trump is Esau and reincarnated, and therefore he must win the presidency. And came out, I was right. Not only that, Biden got in without getting into the whole story of why. And of course, Trump failed or whatever without getting into the whole story. But I knew that, wait a minute, he's Esau, really. And his job is to assist Israel, Jacob, to bring the Messiah. If that's the case, he's going to win again. And that's what I said. And everybody said, what are you talking about? That happened only once in the history of America, and so on. And of course, he won. Why? Because he didn't finish his job. And his job is biblical. In fact, it's Messianic, and so on. Because what is the job of Esau? That is the question. The job of Esau, ish sadeh. What does that mean? The job of Jacob is to bring down holiness, to bring down holiness from heaven. And he would do that by committing himself totally to the learning of Torah, which he did, and so on, and being observant and so on, the whatever and so on. But the job of Esau is not that. The job of Esau really was to fight evil. That means to withstand a terrible Yetzer Hara, which is an evil inclination, terrible, to fight that and therefore draw back what's called the heavenly sparks of holiness into the good side and to stop nations from being evil, which means not righteous and so on. That's a man of the field. That was his job. And Yaakov took it over when he went to the house of Lavan. That's why he went to the house of Lavan, to take over the job of Esau. And Lavan was a very evil person and so on. And his job was to somehow diminish the evil of Lavan, which was basically successful while getting into that. In any case, was the job of Esau. Well, guess what? If Trump is a reincarnation of Esau, that's exactly what he's going to do. Fight evil. In fact, he's fighting evil more than MAGA. You know, he's supposed to make America great again, economically and so on. But we find him being so busy taking over Venezuela and maybe Cuba and maybe South America and Iran. I mean, it's incredible. He's more busy fighting evil than he is America great again, although he's doing that also and so on. But nobody expected him to fight Iran. Where's he come off doing that and so on, you know? Because his job, he's doing his job. As Esau, that answer, that mystery of what he's doing. And he's fighting the evil of the world and so on. And the evil of the world really is 4 types, because each type of evil is called a klipa. And I don't want to get into too heavy, but Esau's job is to reverse one of the types of evil. There are 4 types of evil, and I'll tell you how they manifest. One type is where in that environment, there's good and evil. When you see an environment that has good and also bad, evil, so that's called the klipas nega. That's what it's called. There's actually, these 4 types of evil are part of the rule, the sovereignty of the Satan. Satan, as we call him, right, has a rule, he has a job, and he can promote 4 types of levels of evil, you see. So good and evil is the job that Esau had to reverse, and so on. And that's what Trump is fighting, but he certainly is fighting the other 3. The other 3 is an environment where there's complete evil. Iran. I mean, the government of Iran is I call it Hitlerian, Hitler. That's how bad it is to kill 45,000. In their 47 years, they've killed tens and tens of thousands of Iranians and all people in the Middle East and so on. And then there's an environment which not only is evil, but it has an alternative Weltanschauung, that evil is dominant, and so on. And then the last type of evil is where this alternative form of philosophy, so to speak, is now pervasive. And these 4 levels of evil or environments are represented by different nations. In any case, so Esau, his job was to reverse that level or environment of evil that can be reversed, and so on. But his real job also is to try to change in a certain way or diminish or obliterate. And that's where we get into an evil that cannot change. What is the solution? It must be obliterated. This is very important to understand. you can negotiate with what's called noiga, which is good and evil, because there's a side of good. And therefore, if you negotiate, maybe you can get them to bend or diminish and so on. But the other sides that promote evil and so on are so bad that you must obliterate them because they will not change. You cannot negotiate. And here's where we begin to see the mistake of Trump, which I will get to. In any case, this is the job of Esau, which we now find Trump doing. And people don't understand what's he doing in foreign affairs all the time. Every day you hear something about foreign affairs, based on his campaign promises, you should hardly hear anything about that. So what determines the change of character? And I'm telling you, because he's a Gilgal, he's a reincarnation of a patriarch. Trump himself does not know his greatness, which is interesting because the soul of a patriarch not only is it Jewish, but it's incredibly great, lofty, as we know what the patriarchs were and so on. In any case, fine. So this is what's going on to a certain extent in terms of Esau and so on. Now I'm going to begin to explain certain facets which are fascinating, which are actually alluded to in the Torah. And this is my next.
Go for it. Go for it.
Right. Okay.
I'll tell you what, actually, one question, just before you go into that, one question some people would ask is they'd say, I can understand how on a geopolitical level, Trump is fighting all kinds of evil. But they'd say, if this is a rectified version of Esau, some people struggle with the fact that there's all these kinds of things in his personal life over the decades, in his business life and his, marital life that they don't find, let's say, lofty, shall we say. I also recognize that you could say the same about all kinds of past presidents as well. It's not strictly limited to him. How do you make sense of that question?
Well, usually when you fight evil, it's because they are affecting you. It's a direct reason, survival, So the wars that the United States fought, as far as I remember, were basically against nations that were conducting a war against the United States. So obviously you have to fight, evil in foreign affairs and so on. But what does Iran have to do with America except in a very far away time?
But that wasn't my question. My question was, if people say, you're saying Trump is a lofty soul, but what about, over the years people had certain, just what some people would say, some question marks around his business ethics and personal ethics.
Okay.
Just how do you square that with this being a very, very lofty soul is the question.
Right. But okay. The answer to that is that Esau is still Trump. In other words, when I say that Esau did tshuva, he did tshuva in a sense, not because he's a tzaddik, he's not a righteous person in that sense, he's not a holy person or he's a nice guy. People really, in many ways, don't know what kind of a character he is. He does tremendous acts of kindness. There's so many stories where he went out of his way to help people. He's in many ways, but he's still Esau. Yeah. Esau as he was in his regular character, right? I don't want to talk bad about the guy, but he is certainly, you could say, he's got arrogance, right? He loves women. I mean, he's still the character, the very materialistic based Esau.
Totally. I just wanted to make sense of that. How to square that question with him being a very lofty soul. So we wanted to make sense of what do we mean by he's now perfected himself. He's now, done repentance and all of that. So I think you're clarifying that.
Yes, but especially the major characteristic of Esau is not only arrogance, but he's an imposter. He's a fraud. He constantly lies, to his father Yitzchak, make believe, do I have to give tithe on salt, whatever that the rabbis bring down as proof, He's a liar. He's an imposter, and so on. But there's one characteristic he has, which in many ways is righteous. Trump is not an imposter, although there are people that will disagree with me. He doesn't lie. He's honest. And one of the main characteristics of Esau is he's a liar. As the rabbis point out, he's an imposter. That characteristic is consistent with Esau, whereas Trump does not possess that. Trump basically is an honest guy. He's upfront.
Is it also the case that, I mean, he certainly will speak the truth over political correctness, which is very refreshing. But is it also possibly the case that the reason he has some of these vices is because Esau is specifically given far more impulsive, negative drives that he has to battle just as part of his job?
Yes. In fact, that's why he was given that, because his job is to fight these Yetzer Hara, which is a Satan. He has to fight the evil. And that, since he has to fight it, he has to have a tremendous Yetzer Hara, or else he has to battle, right? But in that sense, he's righteous. He's not a liar. He's honest and upfront, and that was the major characteristic of Esau, you see. So therefore, that's the tshuva of Esau, that he's honest and so on. But he's still mundane. He's still earthly. He has if you want to use the word, he has all the vices, so to speak, of the average person, the average temptations and so on. And like I said, but he's a nice guy, but especially he's an honest guy. Although there are people that would disagree with me, of course. But to get back to Trump himself and so on, so I was going to mention certain ideas. It says, Rav Yavoy Tzoir, the older will serve the younger. That's what it says. One wonders, what's this older will serve the younger? It should have said, and Esau will serve Jacob. That's what it should have said. Why didn't I identify them by name? Why called Esau the older, identify him, and Jacob as the younger? So I said several weeks, about a month ago, an interesting idea. I said, what that indicates is that the Torah used the term and the older to tell you the older what? The older brother will serve the younger brother. So I said a very, very interesting idea that in the end, the relationship between Esau and Yaakov, when he does come back, he will restore brotherhood. Right. That's why the Torah used a term that can refer to brother, and the older brother will serve the younger brother. You see, so I said their relationship will be as brothers, because in order for Esau to help Jacob, especially pre-messianically, he's got to get rid of evil in all over the world, right? And therefore, he can only do that if he loves his brother. It's got to be brotherly love to go and take on the evil of the entire world. I said that. And lo and behold, last week, when Trump was talking about the pilots, he said, when we were involved in getting that pilot, that fell out of the sky, whatever, in Iran, I felt my relationship with Netanyahu, we were like brothers. He actually used the term, check, brothers.
Yeah, I saw.
He actually used the term that I described, and I had described that relationship weeks before. And Netanyahu then said, well, we feel like the little brother, and he feels like the big brother. They're actually using the terms that I said would be their relationship. So that is why they're so close, because Esau is doing tshuva, and the relationship of that tshuva, repentance, is brotherhood, which is very interesting.
You have to check out the trailer for our new documentary on Moshiach, the Jewish belief about the Messiah, what he will do, how the world will look after his coming, and why his arrival is close. And if you want to watch the full thing, just click the link below in the video description. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have carried a promise that history is not a random cycle, that suffering and darkness and exile are not the end of the story, that one day the world will be redeemed and the Messiah, the Moshiach in Hebrew, will come. But what does that actually mean? Who is Moshiach? When will he come? How will we know he's real? Why would God design a world that waits so long for redemption in the first place? And what will life feel like after he comes? With AI and machines beginning to replace work, maybe we're already catching a glimpse. But then what will we do with our days? The prophets spoke of that world long ago. In this groundbreaking JTV Plus documentary, we uncover the truth about the Jewish vision of the Messiah, who he is, why it matters, and why his coming could be closer than you think. Join us as we reveal the truth about history's most anticipated figure. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.
Anyway, I wanted to share that with you, which is in many ways very important and so on. Also, what's interesting also is, wait a minute, Trump said, actually, I think in the middle of Passover, that he's going to bomb bridges and power stations and so on, and send Iran back to the Stone Age and so on. Yeah, but and all of a sudden, he changed his mind.
And I noticed even that he said that, I was thinking he was saying that on, it would have been the date, the Tuesday deadline would have been 21st of Nisan, the date of Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. And I was thinking, wow, the timing is crazy.
Exactly, and so on. So the question is, wait a minute, why did he change? That's and he's like, he almost like swore he would do that. And we know that he does what he says. What happened? And so on, that he changed. Blockade is an economic disaster, but the other one would have been a physical disaster, and so on. So I said this in a lecture, why that happened, because we have to remember one thing. This is a war happening here, but not only here, we are guided by a heavenly war, right? We don't realize what's going on in heaven. There's a whole, just like the Chazal, the rabbis say, at Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the Red Sea, there was a whole heavenly debate. Should we destroy the Jews too? Because they also worship idols. And the Satan, he was the angel of Egypt, because every nation has an angel that protects it from the heavenly tribunal, from the accusations, and so on. So the reality was that Egypt had to be destroyed. So this angel said, wait a minute, why? He wanted to save Egypt by saying, but include the Jews because they also worship idols. And anyway, so that was a real debate in heaven, and they would decide what happens to Egypt. Anyway, fortunately, our angel, which is Michael in English, Michael, procured evidence of the incredible evil of Egypt, and Egypt lost. And God said, no, Egypt is destroyed and the Jews will be maintained. Without getting into that, so it's certainly by a war with the Jewish people, there's always a heavenly tribunal. In fact, it occurs always in mankind, and so on. In any case, there's a huge heavenly tribunal now in heaven. And who's arguing for Iran? The angel of Iran. And Iran really is Yishmael. That's what's called the klipa, or the evil of Iran is really a repetition of the evil of Yishmael, right.
Isn't Iran Paras, Persia?
Yes, but Persia is Islam.
So, but I thought Paras and Yishmael were two separate entities.
No, Yishmael is
Interesting.
represented differently in different ages. It can
Okay.
shift. Just like there's no Amalek today. So who is Amalek? Germany. What does Germany have to do with Amalek? And the answer to that is there are no Amalekites anymore, but Germany took on the characterological character structure of
Yeah.
Amalek. So it does shift, obviously, we're thousands of years away from Yishmael and so on.
Right.
Without
Right.
that, anyway, so the angel of Iran, let's call it Porus, Persia, and so on, right? You can believe that he's up there trying to save Iran. So when Trump came out with a statement, I'm going to send you guys back to the what? The Stone Age. Who do you think is up there trying to defend Iran? For not. So here's what that angel said as a defense. He said, wait a minute. Persia is the one that gave the right of the Jews to rebuild the second temple, which is the rebirth of the Jews. You know, Persia did it, Darius. So wait a minute. Don't they deserve to survive? Why? Because there's a tremendous difference. If you destroy a bridge, it takes years to build a bridge. If you destroy all the bridges and you destroy the power plants, it's going to take 100 years for Iran to come back to a normalcy.
But couldn't you say that
Oh,
Yishmael didn't help build the second temple? It was Persia,
but they
not Yishmael.
yes, but they represented, but they did a tremendous chesed to the Jewish people 2,000 years ago. So the angel said, listen, we did a tremendous chesed. We allowed the Jews to rebuild their temple, Darius. So we deserve some form of reward, and measure for measure. We allowed them to rebuild through Ezra, we allowed them to rebuild their nation. So you have to save us and not send us back to the Stone Age, even if we deserve severe punishment because we killed so many people. And God hears justice. You should know, God is always just. So as far as what I'm going to say, is God said, you're right. Persia, which is Iran, right, in a former time, did that. They are responsible for the rebirth of the Jewish people. Yeah, you have any idea what that means and so on? So you're right. I'm going to change Trump's mind, which God can do. It takes nothing and so on. So all of a sudden, he stops doing that and he goes into an economic, because the economic, you can only reverse it in one day. Just take away the blockade and so on.
And Rabbi, can
Apparently,
I ask, are you saying this based on the debate in the Gemara over whether Edom, which is the West, will fall to Persia, or whether Persia will fall to Edom, and they both bring arguments? Is that what this is based on?
yes, I'm giving you a very interesting perspective of why Trump changed his mind, which nobody
And
understands.
right, no one understands that, but is that the only necessary possible answer? Could it
No,
not just be? Could there be other answers, explanations for what has happened?
it could be, but it begs the question, why? He said he was going to destroy them, you know, and I don't even think he will, because the blockade will destroy Iran. But the blockade can be reversed. They can be reversed in a day or two by
Right.
releasing oil wells and so on. Whereas the bombing the other thing, forget about it. It takes maybe 100 years to rebuild that, because he was going to destroy every
Mm.
power plant and every bridge. Forget it. That would terminate the country. You can't live without electricity. And there's no commerce between over the rivers because there's no bridges and so on. It's right. It would have
Yeah.
reversed sunrise. So I believe for that to happen, it had to been the decree in heaven that I'm going to have mercy on Iran. Interesting. So I want
Interesting.
to, and by the way, The word Islam, most people don't realize this, but the word Islam spelled in Hebrew is Aleph Samach Lamed Mem. If you take the same letters and reverse it or jumble it up, spells Samuel. Samuel is the Hebrew name of the Sultan. The name of the religion spells the name of the Sultan. So in many ways, Yishmael, in many ways, is capable of incredibly satanic acts, which is very important, so on. And that explains the concept of Yishmael always going to war and so on. In any case, I don't get into that, but and so on. So I believe that's what occurred, because everything that occurs happens because of a decree in heaven, even though we don't realize, and so on and so on. So that's how I explain, the concept of and so on. But we have to remember the job of Trump, which he is engaging in, is to change the world in many ways. To change the world, change the world from evil to good, and then from good to righteousness, which is greater than good, and righteousness, hopefully, to holiness, which is even greater than righteous, and from a holiness to of a divine nature, which is even greater. And in the Messianic age, the world will become of a divine nature, and so on. So therefore, this is the job of Esau, aka Trump, which we are seeing actually unfolding in front of our eyes. But what's the problem here? Trump, although he's a very good man, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't get it. He does understand something, that he has a divine mission. He does understand that, but he doesn't know what it is. I don't know if you can blame the guy, although God sends a message. The first message God sent him was the bullet that missed his brain by a quarter of an inch. Now that was an open divine miracle. And he said it, and he recognizes it, because he said at the beginning of his lecture, or whatever he's going to speak, he always looks one way. But this time he looked the opposite way, and he never does that. And because he looked the opposite way, the bullet missed his head. Had he looked his normal way, he would have died instantly, and so on. So he recognized that, wait a minute, I never do this. Why did I do it? It has to be the hand of God. He recognized that, which is very interesting. But there's something he doesn't realize. God does not perform miracles so openly and so pervasive. Why? Because he doesn't want to disturb free will. Because if you recognize something so clearly the hand of God, it's going to be hard to sin, right? And he doesn't want to disturb the concealment of free will and so on. But what he did was incredible. In front of the entire world, and there were probably at least a couple of billion people watching that speech in Pennsylvania, in Bullard, Pennsylvania, and so on, and why God would never do that. But he did it because it was necessary to perform an outright miracle to tell Trump a message. What was that message? Well, from this incredible success of the Iranian war, that's obvious. Historians and militarists, they note this was absolutely incredible. Wars take years. Look at Afghanistan war or whatever war, the Ukrainian war takes years. This war is 5 weeks old, 6 weeks old, and they already destroyed all the Air Force, all the Navy, right? All the leaders. You have any idea what it is to kill 40 leaders in the first day of the war? You talk about muzzle. You talk about luck. This doesn't happen. I mean, World War II took 5 years, 6 years, whatever. You got to wake up and say, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. In fact, when they saved that pilot who was downed and so on, historians say it was flawless and it was an incredibly difficult mission. The guy had to climb a 7,000-foot mountain. I mean, how in the world did that happen? And so on. And they say that this rescue was historic. Why do you think it happened? You think because of the brilliance of the military? No. God is saying, I'm going to show you this is what I want you to do. I'm going to make everything happen flawlessly. You and Israel are going to work together in incredible companionship and coordination. The U.S. has never had an ally like Israel. The coordination, the perfection, they never had this before. And for them to basically militarily wipe out Iran, which was a very formidable enemy, in 6 weeks is incredible. Nobody can believe this. I'm sure they're studying this from West Point. How in the world does this happen? Look how long Ukraine and Russia are fighting, a couple of years already, and so on, and nobody's really winning. They're blowing each other apart, which itself is fascinating, and so on. How in the world do they have this to Iran? Iran wasn't the pushover. I mean, Iran has missiles galore, drones galore. How in the world, and they kill the 3 tier of leadership. They killed them in what? In 5 weeks, 4 weeks. And they go in and they're killing the whole Iranian leadership structure. This is divine assistance. How could anybody not see this? So, and now, in order to make sure that Trump sees this, because that's why God saved him, to take out Yishmael, because God wants to bring the Mashiach. That's why he's still on the way, except it requires preparatory ideas and so on, God said, listen, this guy's not getting it. He's playing around. You see, he's playing around with an evil. That's a level 10 evil. You see, it's part of the 3 evil environments and so on. He's playing around with them, negotiating. What are you talking about? You don't negotiate with a Hitlerian evil and so on. A nation that kills 45,000 of its citizens with a bullet in the head and so on. What are you doing? You see, and besides, 47 years of murder. How many Americans they killed? I mean, Trump really, it's incredible how presidents ignored that, because the Constitution demands that one of the major jobs of a president is to protect its citizens. And Iran is killing its citizens American citizens for 47 years. Where are you guys? Why don't you take out Iran? The Constitution says they have to take out Iran. And they were all afraid. Because in many ways, I don't want to get into the other presidents, but Trump is committing a terrible mistake. He's not listening to the divine message. And to make sure, not only because, look at the miracles performed in the time span of what they did, but in the military operations to take out the nation's entire navy. You know what that is? You're talking about a whole navy, a whole air force. This doesn't happen in real life. It takes years for this to go on. So, and so on. And don't you get it? That I'm behind you, and so on. But to make sure that, why are you not listening or thinking about why I saved you from the bullet? In any case, to make sure that Trump listens again, God sends him another message. Assassination. God says, you don't want to do, I saved you from an assassination. I'm going to bring on another assassination, right? And I'm going to save you to remind you that I saved you already, well, whatever, a year, 2 years ago and so on, right? I'm going to remind you, hey, I'm the guy in charge, not just Secret Service. They didn't save you, even though it looks that way, but they didn't. I could have had this guy come and kill both you and your wife and the rest of the cabinet. if I wanted to. Nothing can stop God. Nothing, including the Secret Service. It was a divine decree that he be saved. You see, because that's why things happen, only because of the decrees of God. So I believe that this assassination occurred again as a reminder to Trump. Do what I sent you for. You need to take out one of the most evil regimes ever known. People that kill their own citizens, 45,000, and over the 47 years, many more. And I'm not even talking about killing. I'm talking about the concept of harm. Do you have any idea how much misery and aggravation people have gone through in 47 years? Let me tell you something. If I would ever be able to talk to Trump, there's a certain midah characteristic that is inviolate and absolute. You have to understand what that is. What is that? And it's a very, very powerful, and God almost always observes that. It's called midas hadin, the attribute of justice. In fact, the world stands on the attribute of justice. Let me tell you something. According to the attribute of justice, how far does it extend? Let's assume somebody commits an act, a sin, an evil. Then obviously he's a direct cause. He will be judged by the attribute of justice, and he will be punished exactly according to what he does. And God knows exactly how to measure behavior. But what happens if he commits a murder, right? And somebody helped him? Well, he's also part of that. He contributes, right? He will also be judged because God judges every single person, no matter what their contribution is to the act of harm. He judges them also. It's going to be less because he wasn't the direct, but he judges them too. That means if somebody commits a murder, okay, and somebody drove him there, right? That person is called a contributor to murder, even if he just drove there, right? People don't realize how far the attribute of justice goes. Well, let me tell you something. Trump is in big trouble, and he does not understand this. And I'm being very vocal about it because I want to try to save the guy. He doesn't realize when they were killing. He told when they were America was attacking Iran, right? People came out protesting. So of course, what happened? So Trump said, "I want you to come out into the street and protest, and I will back you." Right? Trump said that.
Yeah, sure.
And what did he do? Nothing. He didn't back them. So of course he didn't interfere. That's the case. So the Iranians got sharpshooters, put them on the roofs, and put a bullet in the head of 45,000 people. Guess what? You're connected to the murders of 45,000 people. Of course you didn't do it, but you're the one who told them to come out. And they relied on you, right? Don't you understand, according to the attribute of justice, when you die and you're standing in front of the great tribunal in heaven being judged by God, guess what? 45,000 Iranians are going to be up there with their neshamas, their souls, pointing their finger at you, that you are the instigator of their death. Do you have any idea about that? And he was. He told them to come out. And not only that, doesn't he realize that Iran kills Iranians every day? Right now, he was trying to save those 8 women that Iran is going to kill. For what? I don't know. But I guarantee you, it's basically nothing, and it's trumped up charges. Doesn't he understand that he now has a connection with murder?
So, Rabbi, just because in the interest of time,
yeah, I know we're getting wow.
we don't have a huge amount of time. If I want to know what you think, what you're saying, the messages that to Trump, what is it that he needs to be doing?
He needs to understand the divine mission. because he at a level that the Midas Hadin is very dangerous for him. He doesn't understand that. Part of his problem, which is interesting, is every king, and he's not a king, but he's a president, but every leader in the biblical times had a prophet who knew what the mission was, and he could guide the king at that time. So he knew what to do. The problem with him is he finally realizes he got a divine mission, which he himself said, by the way, in a press conference and so on, that he knows a divine mission and so on, but he doesn't know really what the mission is. Really, he's got to have somebody advising him, somebody that can have a feel for what is happening and he can hear it, right? And say, wait a minute, let me find out at least a perspective. He doesn't even have a perspective. He just knows God sent him on something, and it's not just to be MAGA, make America great again. This is his problem. He has no real understanding of how to read what is going on, which is tragic. And now, like I said, what's real tragic is he now involved in an accusation of murder. This is no joke.
Isn't that God's responsibility, though, to engineer that, to make sure that this message gets to him?
Maybe. I don't know what God's thought is. I don't know what I can have a question on his decrees, but I have no idea what his reality is. God's knowledge of reality is unfathomable, and we don't know, and so on. Maybe that's why I'm giving this interview, so he can hear.
Right. Maybe we have a duty to get the word out. Yeah.
Right. Because
and go for it.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is the problem now is that, and what again, besides the divine assistance, which is unfathomable that he's having in this war, shows him that God is on his side, which is incredible.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask, Rabbi, what do you think if you could advise Trump on what to do specifically when it comes to his military decisions here? What would you want to see happening immediately with regard to Iran?
What I would want to see is that he should deal definitively, decisively, absolutely, completely with Iran now. This negotiation business, as far as I'm concerned, is absurd.
Yeah, the regime has to end, basically.
Right. He has to understand that Iran killed many Americans that he's duty bound by the Constitution to stop.
Sure.
And he knows what to do. He's a very bright guy. And doesn't he understand why at 79 years old, I think that's how old he is, and so on, that he is in great health. His mind is working fully, accurately and so on. Does he think this is normal? I mean, the average 79 years old is looking around for his cane. Doesn't he understand that? That his ability to function at such a high level, the guy doesn't sleep, or he hardly sleeps and so on. Doesn't he understand? Health comes from God.
Yeah.
There's so obvious signs that God is protecting him. 3 assassination attempts, and he survived them all. And the war is historic, and the rescue of the pilot is historic. I mean, doesn't he get it? And so on, So that's what I would say.
And was there any
negotiations? End it. Which I don't care what you do. Really, according to the attribute of justice, Iran should be terminated and certainly sent back to, well, I hate to say Stone Age, but they have to be destroyed. The mullahs have to be destroyed. It's not enough to stop the what do you call it, the uranium. That's not why he went to war. He's got to get rid of the regime or evil continues. And he will be held responsible if Iran does any kind of harm.
Yeah. Rabbi, we're nearly out of time, but were there any other final remarks or messages that you wanted to convey?
Yes. Don't make a mistake. Mashiach is coming, and this is only part of it. But sometimes you have to exercise real logic and then thought and so on, to do it and so on. And the second thing is not only Mashiach is coming, but God is on top of everything, and everything that is occur, the unbelievable success. And when I speak about Trump, I speak about Israel too. Do you know that no plane has been injured in the entire war? And Israel performs unbelievably beautiful because the side of the judgment is on the side of Israel because God wants to bring the Messiah now before this whole world collapses with so much evil going on. I mean, it's just incredible. Every day you hear about it. I believe Tufshin Pei Vov, 5,786, is the year that the Messiah will come. But it just takes these things, and part of it has to be contributed by mankind. And now
Can I
it's
ask,
yeah.
what do you, just a final question, what do you foresee happening with your knowledge of Torah and prophecy? What does the Torah sources tell us will happen, once these geopolitical forces have been dealt with, once Trump has concluded his mission? What
Well,
happens next?
I'll tell you what will happen next. I mean, that's a whole lecture in itself. What does the Messianic time look like? Why does it have to happen? And so on. Who is the Messiah? When does he come? How do we bring him? There's so many unanswered questions. Most people have no concept of what the Messianic era is, yet it's an era that is filled with divine providence and the Beis Hamikdash and so on. We don't even realize what that is and so on, the
But
Messianic
are you
era.
saying that era will immediately come after Iran is destroyed?
Yes, basically. That'll usher in the second stage. Trump is a first stage messianic attempt. Right. But he's not doing his job. That's the problem. Because if he buckles underneath now, he maybe buckle on like for instance, and I hold that's why Memdani is the mayor as a punishment. Why? Because Trump told Netanyahu, I'm not giving you permission for the West Bank, right, to annex to
Yeah,
Israel. Excuse me, it's not your decision to make or the
yeah,
Arab. This is the divine promise where
yeah.
God says, and you prevent him? Okay, so here's what God says. You want to make sure it remains in the hands of the Arabs? Okay, I'm going to take your main city, New York City, and I'm going to put it in the hands of a Mohammed, of a Muslim communist. That's why it's a miracle that this guy, 34 years old, is running a company. It's like running GE when you have no business experience. Excuse me, doesn't he
Yeah.
get a punishment? Right.
But
You
yeah,
do nothing. So
but go on, go for it.
it would be great if Trump had somebody to interpret these things, at least a different perspective, then think about it. But
Hmm.
now he's making he could have done something and so on. But like I say, he's not aware of how to analyze or think about the divine agenda. And
Hmm.
this is very problematic and so on. But he has to understand he is stage one of the Messianic era in many ways. In fact, the gematria, the numerical value of Donald Trump in Hebrew is Mashiach ben David. I'm not saying he's the Messiah of David because he's not Jewish, but it shows you that he is part of a messianic process, and that is a reward to Esau for doing tshuva. You know,
And so what is stage two? I mean, I understand what the Messianic era looks like, but just in order to get there, once Trump defeats Iran, what is stage two? What happens next?
Mashiach ben Yosef, that's stage two. Somehow he will become known, and when God does something, it always works. I don't know how, we don't know how, but he will be an individual that will be recognized as a messianic figure And there won't be any doubt because we're looking at the real Messiah. Sheikh ben Yosef is a real Messiah, except his job is different than the Davidic Messiah, and so on. That's stage 2. And he will then slowly become known and be able to do his job. And one of his jobs is that the Beis Hamikdash will appear out of nowhere for the Messianic era. Right. We're going to have the temple again. Because the Talmud says in Ma'aser Sheni and Yerushalmi, whatever, that the temple will be rebuilt before the Davidic Messiah comes.
Right. Right.
Which is incredible. But how? Yeah. And one of the main ideas is that it will just appear, which means that the mosque will disappear, and in its place will be the third Beis Hamikdash.
But and so that stage 3 is Moshiach ben David.
Right. Well, there are intermediary stages, but then the final third stage is the Davidic Messiah, Moshiach ben David himself, right? And one of the interesting things about the third temple, people don't realize why is that so much different than the second temple? Because the third temple, when it descends, it will descend from the third temple, which is now in heaven, and it descends to earth. But the interesting thing about that is that that third temple in heaven has a level of divine presence, the Shekhinah, which is 100 times greater than the divine presence that happened by Moshe, the Mishkan, and so on. In other words, the Shekhinah will be a heavenly Shekhinah, not an earthly Shekhinah, because the Beis Hamikdash that comes down will come down from heaven itself, retaining the level of the divine presence. And
wow.
That, I believe, is how every Jew in the entire world will be stunned by that miracle. And that's how God is going to bring the consciousness of Mashiach ben Yosef and the whole Messianic era.
And you're saying that when you say you believe Mashiach, your view is you think it could happen this year. Are you saying both stage 2 and stage 3 could all happen in the span of 1 year?
We're waiting for stage 2.
So how long would stage 2 last before stage 3?
Nobody really knows. But we do know that the Zohar says that Tchias HaMesim, which is resurrection of the dead, which is a whole lecture in itself, the resurrection of the dead will take place over 214 years. Right. It doesn't happen once. It happens over 214 years. So according to that Zohar, he has to come, the Davidic Messiah, which is when the resurrection of the dead occurs, has to happen this year. Certainly, it has to begin this year.
Lastly, with this stage 2 era, will that be a stage? If you have the first Messiah, Moshiach ben Yosef, is this stage 2? Does it occur when there's world peace, or can there still be war and bloodshed during that era?
No, that all ends because in the Messianic era, the Satan is killed. Or is an argument. Is he killed? Or does he turn to good? He becomes a good angel. It's an argument. But anyway, evil is terminated in the Davidic age. There's no evil. And that's why you're able to get up from the dead. Because there's no Satan to take anybody's life. Right?
Right.
He's the guy that kills. So if he's not around, you live forever. Right. So when the Mashiach ben David comes, then the resurrection of the dead begins to occur. But before that can occur, the Satan must be killed or terminated, however it happens. No more. So if the Satan is terminated, by the way, then there's no wars, there's nothing. And by the way, I'll leave you with this one last message. Did you ever notice something that's completely abnormal? And you have to understand now, since I said this, and then we'll end, even though it's fascinating. The problem is this. This is completely abnormal. People don't hate presidents. They may disagree with their policies and hold they're wrong. Fine. But you have a phenomenon that never happened. Everybody hates. It's a gut hatred of Trump. I mean, there are people that are saying, for instance, in this assassination attempt, I hope he dies. There were actually people saying that. And I heard journalists saying, well, I hope they kill him. And so on. Why? You really think the guy deserves death? Yes. They would love to kill the guy. But you never hear that. Nobody hates the president like that. It's not normal. You could be angry or disagree with his policies, but you hate him or you want him to drop dead? What does that mean? Did that ever happen in the presidencies and so on? I don't think so. So the question is why? And the answer is because Trump is the greatest danger the Sultan has ever seen. Because if he succeeds in getting rid of Iran, who begins to die? Who begins to lose its power? And who is ultimately terminated? Sultan. So guess what? He knows exactly the psyche of every person, because that's his job. And he is influencing desperately everybody, not just to get rid of, but to kill the guy. It's satanic. The hatred of the Sultan and so on is satanic. To get rid of him so the Sultan can survive and go on.
And actually, Trump himself, when he was asked just now about the recent assassination, he said, why do you think you keep being shot at? He said, I've studied assassinations, and I know that it's always the most impactful people that face assassination attempts. Ones who don't do much, people don't feel so threatened by. So I think...
No, he's wrong. It has nothing to do with doing much. It has to do with fighting evil.
Yeah. Well, I think that's that kind of clarification is what he needs to hear. So hopefully you or this message can get to him, and he can understand that, or that God can engineer that in some way. But Rabbi Kessin, as always, thank you so much for your insights and giving us a perspective on all of this that you don't hear every day of the week, and it's just it takes all of this to a totally new level, and it's really profound stuff. So thank you so much for your time. Just quickly, we've all heard of heaven, hell, and the afterlife. And at some point, I'm sure you've given it some thought. But the Jewish view is radically different from almost everything you've been taught. And once you hear it, it will change how you understand life itself. Have a watch of the trailer for our new JTV Plus documentary called Heaven, Hell, and the Afterlife. And you can watch the full film right now by clicking the link below in the video description. Across the world, the afterlife is described in simple terms. Heaven above, hell below, the devil waiting to tempt you, and a humanity born in original sin. But Judaism tells a story that is older, deeper, and far more hopeful. Less obsessed with fear and more rooted in purpose. A story where the soul is not born guilty, but born noble. Where the body is not the enemy, but the partner. Where the devil isn't God's rival, but his assistant, because Judaism has no second power. Where hell exists, but not forever. Where heaven exists, but not as the final destination. And where the real end of the human story is resurrection, not escape. Judaism views history as a mission, not a mistake. Other civilizations teach that we are here to earn our way into heaven. Judaism teaches that we are here to bring heaven down to earth. And to understand what happens after we die, we first have to understand why we're here in the first place. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to reveal the Jewish vision of life after death. One of the most misunderstood ideas, but if understood correctly, can transform your very understanding of life itself. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.